That night with my son Lucas was hands down the wildest, and somehow the most unforgettable night of my life. My name's Michael, and I want to share a story. It's personal. It's hard to talk about, but I've carried it for too long. Lucas is 19 now, but this all began a few years ago, right after my wife, Barbara, passed away. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever faced. And suddenly, it was just Lucas and me, trying to make sense of life without her. In the beginning, it was rough. Lucas barely spoke. He kept to himself, locked away in his room or gone with friends. He never brought up Barbara, never talked about how he felt, and I didn't push him. Instead, I tried to make home feel safe, warm. I cooked his favorite meals, left little notes on his desk, just small reminders that I was still here, that he wasn't alone. But still, for months, he kept his distance. Then, one evening, he quietly walked into the kitchen while I was washing up after dinner. I didn't even hear him at first. His sudden presence startled me, but I was happy to see him. He hardly ever came to me like that. "Need help, Dad?" he asked, his voice soft, but sure. I looked at him, caught off guard, but nodded. "Sure," I said, handing him a towel. "You can dry the dishes." We stood there in silence, working side by side. And honestly, it felt like something was shifting. Like maybe, just maybe, the wall between us was starting to crack. "How was school today?" I asked, trying to keep the moment going. "It was fine," he said quietly, eyes still on the plate in his hands. That was it. I didn't press him. "If you ever want to talk," I said gently, glancing his way, "I'm here." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him nod. He didn't say anything else. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing small changes. Lucas began spending more time around me, sitting in the living room while I watched TV, helping out with little things around the house. And slowly, he started to open up. He told me about school, his classes, even his plans for college. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. It felt like maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back to something that resembled normal. But then, one evening, something happened that shifted everything. We were having dinner together. Lucas had cooked that night. Just a simple pasta recipe he'd picked up from a friend. Nothing fancy, but it meant a lot to see him put in the effort. As we ate, he looked up at me and said, "You're amazing, Dad." I chuckled a little, brushing it off. "Thanks, Lucas. That means a lot," I said, keeping my voice casual. But he didn't smile. He kept looking at me, with this intensity that made my stomach twist. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice careful, searching. "Nothing," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." I nodded, unsure what to say. Something about the moment felt off. But I told myself I was overthinking it. He was just being thoughtful, right? The crazy night hadn't happened yet. But that dinner, that was the beginning. Because after that evening, things started to shift. Lucas began to hover around me more. He'd find reasons to sit close on the couch, linger in the kitchen while I cooked, even when he had nothing to say. At first, I thought it was sweet. Maybe he was just trying to reconnect. We had grieved alone for so long. Maybe now he needed closeness. But then came the looks. His eyes would linger just a little too long. And the compliments? They started coming more often and felt different. "It's just more personal. You look really nice today, Dad," Lucas said one morning as I stood at the sink, washing dishes. "Thanks, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my tone light. But something about the way he said it, the way he looked at me, made my stomach twist. It was subtle, but it didn't feel quite right. One evening, we were on the couch watching a movie. Some comedy we'd both seen a dozen times. Lucas had picked it. Familiar, easy background noise. Halfway through, I realized he was sitting closer than usual, our shoulders almost touching. I shifted slightly, expecting him to give me space. He didn't. "You're always so busy," he said, breaking the silence. "You never take time for yourself." I gave a quiet smile, a little thrown. "That's what dads do, Lucas," I said. "There's always something that needs doing." He shook his head, his eyes locked on mine. You do too much. You deserve a break. His words hit me harder than I expected. That's sweet of you, I said softly. But I'm fine. Really. That night I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the moment on the couch replaying in my head. Was it innocent? Was I imagining things? Was something really changing? In the days that followed, the pattern continued. Lucas kept finding reasons to be near me. If I was in the kitchen, he'd wander in to chat. If I was out in the garden, he'd come sit beside me, even if he said nothing. And the compliments kept coming. Each one felt warmer, more personal. And every time, I felt a little more uneasy. But if I'm being honest, really honest, I caught myself doing it too. Watching him longer than I should. Listening more closely. Reacting to every word. You make this house feel alive, he said one afternoon as I folded laundry. I froze, just for a moment. Thank you, Lucas, I said finally, forcing a small smile. But inside something twisted. Something I couldn't name. Something was shifting. And not in a way I was ready for. That feeling of unease, it just kept growing. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. That Lucas was just being kind. Maybe even trying to make up for the time we'd spent apart after Barbara died. But it wasn't just the compliments. It was the way he acted around me, how he always seemed to be there, watching me, finding reasons to be close. And the truth is, I hadn't yet figured out why I was doing the same with him. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. I heard Lucas walk in behind me, his footsteps soft against the tile. I didn't turn around. I focused on the cutting board, hoping he'd just grab a snack and leave. Need help, Dad? He asked. I glanced over my shoulder and gave a quick smile. Sure. You can slice these carrots, I said, sliding the board his way. He stepped beside me, his movements calm, precise, and started cutting. For a few minutes, we worked in silence. And for a moment, it felt normal. Just a quiet, pleasant evening in the kitchen. But then he stopped, turned to face me. You've done so much for me, he said, voice low and steady. I paused, confused. What do you mean? I mean, after Mom died, you handled everything. You didn't have to. But you did. His eyes were locked on mine, and I felt it, a tightness in my chest. Of course I did, Lucas, I said, trying to sound steady. You're my son. I love you. He nodded slowly, but didn't look away. I just don't think I ever said thank you. For all of it. You don't have to thank me, I replied, turning back to the stove. That's what dads do. He didn't respond, but I could feel it, his gaze still on me. The moment was heavy, too heavy, and I just wanted nothing more than for the moment to just end. Finally, he picked up the knife again and resumed cutting. I let out a quiet breath I hadn't realized I was holding. After dinner that night, I settled on the couch with a book, hoping to lose myself in the story. A little escape. But then Lucas walked into the living room and sat down, not in his usual spot at the far end, but right next to me. What are you reading? He asked, leaning in to glance at the cover. Just a novel, I said, holding it up. Nothing too exciting. Can I read it with you? He asked. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. Why would you think that? He shrugged. I don't know. I just feel like maybe I've done something to upset you. You haven't upset me, I said. Quickly, I've just been tired, he nodded. But didn't say anything else after a few more minutes. He stood up. I'll leave you alone, he said, his voice quiet. I watched him walk back into the house, a knot of guilt forming in my chest. He hadn't done anything wrong, Hades, so why did I feel so uneasy? The days that followed felt strange, as though a heavy cloud had settled over the house. I tried to act normal, cooking meals, tidying up and going about my usual routine, but I couldn't shake the tension I felt whenever Lucas was nearby. He hadn't done anything overtly wrong, but his presence lingered in a way that felt different. And then, one night, I made a conscious effort to keep some distance. After dinner, I retreated to my bedroom earlier than usual, hoping for some quiet time to myself. I curled up with a book, letting The soft glow of the lamp created a small cocoon of warmth. It felt like a rare reprieve from the unsettling dynamic that had begun to develop. I felt tension and an excitement in me when thinking about Lucas, and it was the first time I recognized it. It caught me off guard, as I couldn't accept the fact that Lucas was my own son. But just as I started to relax, there was a soft knock at the door. Dad Lucas's voice was low, almost hesitant. I hesitated before answering. "Yes, can I come in?" I glanced at the clock. It was late, far past the time Lucas usually went to bed. "Is something wrong?" I asked, sitting up slightly. I wanted to talk," he said. I sighed, I set my book aside. "Come in," I said. The door creaked open, and Lucas stepped inside. He looked different somehow, less like the confident young man he usually was, and more like the boy I used to comfort after nightmares when he was small. He paused in the doorway, like he wasn't sure if he should come closer. "What's on your mind?" I asked, patting the edge of the bed. He walked over slowly and sat down, his movements quiet and deliberate. For a moment, he didn't say anything, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then he looked up, his gaze meeting mine. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said softly. "For what?" I asked, my voice cautious. "For making you feel uncomfortable," he said. His tone was honest, open. "I know I've been acting different lately, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to make things weird between us." I blinked, taken aback by his honesty. "Lucas, I started, but he cut me off gently. "I've just been feeling a lot of things," he said, his voice catching slightly, "and I don't really know how to deal with them. But I don't want to hurt you, ever." His words hung in the air, heavy, vulnerable, raw. I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Lucas," I said gently, "it's okay to feel confused, especially after everything we've been through. Grief doesn't always come out in ways we understand." He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry." I gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before letting go. "Let's not worry about it tonight," I said, softening my tone. "We'll figure it out together." There was still something hanging between us. Tension, yes, but not danger. Just the weight of everything we hadn't said. The grief we hadn't processed. The space between who we were and who we were becoming without Barbara. The look in his eyes told me one thing: he just needed to feel safe. And maybe so did I. More was coming. I could feel it. I set my book aside. "Come in," I said. The door creaked open, and Lucas stepped inside. He looked different somehow, less like the confident young man he usually was, and more like the boy I used to comfort after nightmares when he was small. He paused in the doorway, like he wasn't sure if he should come closer. "What's on your mind?" I asked, patting the edge of the bed. He walked over slowly and sat down, his movements quiet and deliberate. For a moment, he didn't say anything, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then he looked up, his gaze meeting mine. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said softly. "For what?" I asked, my voice cautious. "For making you feel uncomfortable," he said. His tone was honest, open. "I know I've been acting different lately, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to make things weird between us." I blinked, taken aback by his honesty. "Lucas, I started, but he cut me off gently. I've just been feeling a lot of things," he said, his voice catching slightly, "and I don't really know how to deal with them. But I don't want to hurt you, ever." His words hung in the air, heavy, vulnerable, raw. I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Lucas," I said gently, "it's okay to feel confused, especially after everything we've been through. Grief doesn't always come out in ways we understand." He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry." I gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before letting go. "Let's not worry about it tonight," I said, softening my tone. "We'll figure it out together." There was still something hanging between us. Tension, yes, but not danger. Just the weight of everything we hadn't said. The grief we hadn't processed. the space between who we were and who we were becoming without Barbara. The look in his eyes told me one thing: he just needed to feel safe. And maybe so did I. More was coming. I could feel it. And from the way he looked at me, I think he felt it too. I gave him the same look back, a quiet acknowledgement, a silent understanding. He nodded again, then stood up. "Good night, Dad," he said softly before leaving the room. I watched him go, a strange blend of relief and sadness settling in my chest. He had acknowledged the tension between us. That felt like progress. But I couldn't help but wonder, would things ever truly feel normal again? One thing was certain: this wouldn't be the last time something like this happened. And I was right, completely right. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. The conversation with Lucas had echoed in my head all night, keeping me awake with questions I couldn't answer and emotions I couldn't name. I got up, pushed through my morning routine, and tried to shake the lingering weight. Lucas seemed different that day, quieter, more closed off. He stayed in his room, barely saying a word. Part of me wanted to check on him, to knock on his door and ask if he was okay. But another part of me felt like I needed to give him space. We were both carrying something unspoken. That evening, I was folding laundry in the living room when he came in. He didn't say anything, just sat on the couch and watched me, silent, unreadable. The quiet stretched out between us, heavy and thick. Finally, I broke it. "You've been quiet today," I said, glancing his way. He shrugged. "Just thinking." I tried to sound casual. "Thinking about what?" There was a pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "About us." I froze. His words hit harder than I expected. "What do you mean?" I asked, careful with my tone. He hesitated, then looked straight at me, his eyes steady, vulnerable. "I mean, I know things have. It's been weird lately, and I don't want it to be like that anymore," he said softly. I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond at first. "I don't want that either," I said finally, my voice low. "But we need to figure out how to move forward." He nodded again, a faint smile crossing his lips. "We will," he said. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things could get better. Maybe we could move past this and rebuild whatever had fractured between us. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand. Or maybe I did understand it. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The unease that had settled over the house didn't go away. Lucas tried to act normal, but I could see it, how he hesitated before speaking, or lingered a little too long when we crossed paths. I wanted to believe his apology marked a turning point. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Then, one night, as I lay in bed scrolling through my phone, trying to unwind, it happened again. The house was quiet, the soft creak of the ceiling fan overhead the only sound. I had just started to drift off when I heard a faint knock at the door. "Dad." Lucas's voice was quiet, hesitant. I sat up, my heart sinking. "Yes. Can I come in?" he asked. I glanced at the clock. Well past midnight. "Lucas, it's late," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "What's wrong?" There was a pause. Then he replied, I need to talk to you." Something in his voice made me pause. I took a deep breath. "Okay, come in." The door creaked open, and Lucas stepped inside. He looked unsure, hands shoved deep into his pockets as he hovered near the doorway. "What is it, Lucas?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, eyes flickering between me and the floor. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other night," he began quietly. "And I feel like I need to be honest with you." My chest tightened. "Honest about what?" I asked gently. He stepped closer and sat down on the edge of the bed. "About how I've been feeling," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Ever since Dad died, I felt lost. You've been holding everything together, and I guess I leaned on you too hard." My breath caught for a second. I waited. "I know it's not fair to put all that on you," he continued, "but I didn't know how else to say it. You've been my anchor, And sometimes, it's hard to figure out where those feelings go. His words hit me hard. I felt frozen, my thoughts spinning. Lucas, I said finally, my voice soft but firm. I love you, and I know this has been an overwhelming time for both of us. But what you're feeling, it's not something you have to carry alone. It doesn't make you wrong. It makes you human. He looked down, blinking back tears. I just needed to say it out loud. I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're young, and you're grieving, I said. Let's work through this together. You're not alone in this, okay? He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to hurt you, I said softly, my heart breaking at the look on his face. But we can't let this continue. You're a good person, Lucas, and you'll find your way through this. He wiped his eyes, then slowly stood up. Good night, Dad, he murmured, barely audible. Good night, I replied, watching as he left the room and quietly shut the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, I locked the door and sank onto the bed, my hands trembling. I couldn't believe what had just happened. A heavy mix of guilt and confusion settled over me as I sat there, trying to make sense of it all. Loved Lucas with everything I had, but his pain, his confusion, it had taken a shape I wasn't prepared for. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying his words, his expression, over and over in my mind. I told myself it was a phase, that grief plays tricks on the heart, and this was just one more way it was showing up. But deep down, I wasn't sure. The next morning, Lucas was quiet. He didn't say much during breakfast. When he left for school, I felt this strange blend of relief and sadness. I tried to distract myself with work, but my mind kept circling back to that conversation. Something about it haunted me. Not just his words, but the weight he carried when he said them. When he came home that evening, he seemed distant. He barely looked at me, heading straight to his room and shutting the door behind him. I wanted to check on him, to talk, to say something that might help, but I didn't know how. I was afraid of making things worse. That night, I was sitting in the living room, the TV on but forgotten. The house was silent, heavy. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Lucas stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Can I sit with you?" he asked quietly. I hesitated just a second, and then nodded. "Of course," I said. He walked over and sat down beside me. He sat down on the couch, leaving a small space between us. For a long while we sat in silence, the air thick with everything unspoken. "Dad," he said finally, his voice soft, "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I replied quickly. "But we do need to set some boundaries, Lucas. For both of us." He nodded slowly, eyes still focused on the floor. "I understand." I reached out and gently placed a hand on his knee. "We'll get through this," I said quietly. "But you have to trust me, okay?" He looked up, his eyes glassy with emotion. "I do," he said. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Then we're going to be okay." As we sat there, I felt the tiniest flicker of hope. Maybe we could move past this. But I also knew it wouldn't happen overnight. The days that followed were quiet, tense, but calm. Lucas kept to himself, and I tried my best to carry on like everything was normal. Still, the truth lingered, heavy in the background. I told myself that acknowledging it, that drawing a clear line, was the right thing, that it would help us move forward. But deep down, I knew silence wasn't the same as healing. Then, one night, I went to bed early. I was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. A whole day spent wrestling my own thoughts had left me drained. The house was quiet, and the cool night air crept in through the windows. Wafted gently through my open window, I tried to let the rhythmic hum of the fan lull me to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. I must have drifted off at some point. I must have drifted off. The next thing I knew, I was being pulled from sleep by the soft creak of my door. My heart jumped. I blinked into the darkness, trying to orient myself. "Dad." Lucas's voice was barely a whisper, but I knew it instantly. I sat up and reached for the bedside lamp. Warm light filled the room, revealing Lucas standing hesitantly in the doorway. His hands fidgeted at his sides, his face uncertain. "Lucas," I said, my voice rough with sleep. "What are you doing?" He stepped in slowly, deliberate and unsure. I couldn't sleep," he said. "I just needed to see you." A tightness crept into my chest as I tried to steady my breathing. "It's late," I said, more awake now. "You should be in bed." "I know," he replied, his eyes finding mine. But I couldn't stop thinking about everything. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, sitting upright. "Lucas," I said gently, "I've been thinking too, but we talked about this." I held his gaze. "I love you, but we can't keep circling the same conversation." He took a small step forward, his expression a mix of pain and longing for clarity. His expression was raw, a mix of vulnerability and determination. "I know it sounds wrong," he said, his voice trembling, "but I can't help how I feel. You're the only one who's ever really been there for me. You've always cared in a way no one else has." My throat tightened as I searched for the right words. "Lucas," I said gently but firmly, "I care about you deeply because I'm your dad. That's my role, always has been. But the feelings you're having, they're a part of your grief. They're real, but they're not a reflection of something wrong with you. They're a sign you're overwhelmed." He stood in silence for a moment, his shoulders slumping under the weight of what I'd said. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears shining in his eyes. "I just didn't know how else to say it." My heart ached seeing him like that, but I kept my voice steady. "It's okay to feel confused, Lucas," I said. "This is something we'll work through together, but only in the way a father should help his son. That boundary matters." He nodded slowly, eyes dropping to the floor. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I said softly. "But we do need to move forward for both our sakes." As I said those words, something inside me shifted. For a moment, doubt crept in. I questioned whether I was being too distant, too clinical. He was my son, hurting, reaching out, and part of me just wanted to fix it all, to say yes to anything if it meant easing his pain. But I knew the truth. Sometimes love means holding the boundary, not bending it. Besides, I think part of me liked what he was trying to do. Maybe because I missed Barbara so much, too. For a moment, we just sat there in silence. Then I said, "You know what? Come here," and motioned for him to sit beside me. He moved closer. I could see it, the walls coming down. He looked me in the eyes, and I leaned in just slightly, not to intimidate, but to show him I was right there, present. He leaned in, too, not physically, but emotionally. And in that moment, it felt like something finally broke open between us. There was no yelling, no distance, just two people who had both been holding in way too much for far too long. We didn't need words. The silence between us said enough. And it felt good, real. I reached out, resting my hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. Instead, he nodded slightly, eyes misting over. It was like we were both finally giving ourselves permission to grieve, not just for Barbara, but for the version of us that had been lost. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just the craziest night of my life. It was the most human, the most real. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel numb. After a while, the emotions settled. We both sat there quietly, letting the moment breathe. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, taking a deep breath. "Don't worry." The room was quiet for maybe 10-20 minutes. Just the soft hum of the fan overhead. Then Lucas stood up and walked toward the door. He paused in the doorway, glanced back at me and said, "Good night, Dad." His voice trembled, full of something I hadn't heard in a long time. Vulnerability. "Good night, Lucas," I replied, my chest tight, but in a different way now. My heart ached, but it also hoped. "Thank you for everything," he added softly. "I mean it." And when the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a shaky breath. The kind you don't realize you've been holding for years. I lay back down, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as the memories of the past few weeks swirled in my mind. We still had a long way to go. I knew that, but for the first time in a long time, I saw a sliver of light, a chance. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to something better. The tension between us had finally broken. By morning, Lucas was quiet, but composed. He joined me at the table for breakfast. Our conversation was light, small talk about school, the weather, a few jokes. But under the surface, I could sense something had shifted. He seemed lighter somehow, like some invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Over the next few weeks, life began to feel a bit more normal. Lucas reconnected with his friends, started focusing on school again, and even mentioned plans for college, something he hadn't brought up since Barbara passed. We never talked about that night again. We didn't need to. There was an unspoken understanding between us. We were both trying. We were both healing. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, Lucas turned to me. "Thanks for being patient with me, Dad. And thank you for everything. For being there, for not giving up on me. Even when I gave up on myself." His words hit me like a wave. I placed a hand gently on his arm. "That's what dads do," I said softly. He smiled, and for the first time in so long, it felt real. Like a piece of him was coming back. In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. I still think about everything we've been through. The grief, the confusion, the anger. And yeah, sometimes I wonder if I handled it all the right way. If I said the right things. If I gave too much, or not enough. But I know this. I love my son. And he loves me. And even in the darkest moments, especially in the darkest moments, that love is what carried us through. I'm sharing this because I think someone else out there might need to hear it. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're a son. Maybe you've been through your own storm. I don't have all the answers, but I do know that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just sitting on a porch, watching a sunset, and saying, "I'm still here." And sometimes, that's enough.